That'll come at a later date, although a date is unknown at this stage. Joining us live this morning, the Shadow Defence Minister, James Paterson. Good to see you, James. Why submit a bill without all the detail? Isn't that a bit of a cart being before the horse?
The government's got this completely backwards. Even they admit their own legislation is so flawed that they will have to fix it in the future. But they're saying, just trust us, we'll rush it through now and then we'll negotiate with you afterwards to repair the mistakes we've made. Well, that's an outrageous approach to legislating. It is not in Australia's national interest. It will harm our economy. It will harm small businesses. It will hurt young people. But I understand why they're trying to do it, because every day this debate goes on, it gets worse for the government. More people speak out, more problems are identified. We've now got 2 Labor premiers on the public record canning Jim Chalmers' budget, and Labor MPs are getting very, very nervous, and they should be, because this is doing serious damage to the government.
Well, it's funny you say trust us, we'll work it out at a later date, but hasn't trust been thrown in the bin following broken promises?
Well, who's to say that Anthony Albanese won't change his mind about this? He's changed his mind about CGT, he's changed his mind about negative gearing, he's changed his mind about trust, he's changed his mind about superannuation, he's changed his mind about stage 3 tax cuts. So if this is rushed through the parliament, if it is slammed through, why wouldn't he change his mind again and not go back and fix the problems that have been identified and just leave it as it is? Once this is legislated, only the government can fix it. And I think that's why they need to stop, they need to pause, they need to consult properly and fix it before they legislate it, not afterwards.
Yeah, as you mentioned...
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It costs you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
The WA Labor Premier, Roger Cook, he wants a carve-out for miners now. And also you've got the Business Council, the BCA, it's entered the chat overnight saying changes should just be limited to housing. So what sort of damage is this being done to corporate Australia? But also, does this not all show the importance of consultation and even holding a public inquiry?
Yes, well, consultation should have been done before the budget, not afterwards, and it should be done before the legislation passes, not afterwards. And of course, there should be a proper parliamentary inquiry. This is incredibly complex changes. It clearly has severe unintended consequences, although maybe we have to question how unintended the consequences are. And rushing through without a parliamentary inquiry is frankly an outrageous thing to do. Australians deserve to have proper parliamentary process and scrutiny of such significant changes, particularly when the government is saying this is about improving housing affordability. How does taxing mining companies improve housing affordability?
Or farmers?
How does taxing small businesses improve housing affordability? How does taxing young people saving for a home deposit through shares improve housing affordability? Of course it doesn't. It's just a grab for revenue, and that's what's being exposed.
Yeah, you'd throw farmers in the mix there too. I mean, as things stand though, James, are you still against, officially, are you voting against the package?
Absolutely, we're voting against the package. And, points for effort to Jim Chalmers putting on a brave face in question time yesterday. But what we'll be voting against is a tax increase. We'll be voting against a tax increase on our mining industry, on our small businesses, on our young savers, on florists, on hairdressers, on plumbers, on concreters, on gym owners, on all Australians who are going to be smashed by this government's tax increases, and we won't be helping them pass.
What about the working Australian tax offset? So as you heard from the Treasurer there, and you just referred to this, he's framing it as that you are voting against tax cuts. So with that $250 in mind, how do you argue against that?
Well, we've got a bigger, better tax cut which will deliver at least $250 to Australians in the first year of its interaction. And then every year after that will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's our tax back guarantee, which will index brackets to inflation, so Australians are never again pushed into a higher tax bracket just because inflation is running rampant as it is under this government. We want lower taxes. We've got a plan for lower taxes. That's why we're going to vote against Labor's plan for higher taxes.
Still related to the budget and more in your wheelhouse now, ASPI, they were on the program a little earlier. They've done some homework on defence spending, arguing the government's defence spend will drop. That's despite Labor's $53 billion pledge in the long run. What's your reaction to that?
Well, ASPI has blown just another hole in Richard Marles' spin when it comes to the defence budget. They join Marcus Hellier at Strategic Analysis Australia and even last night in Senate estimates, the Department of Finance, in calling out Richard Marles' bluff here. I mean, Richard Marles has been claiming there's $14 billion of increased government spending on defence over the forward estimates. In fact, ASPI shows, as the Department of Finance also admitted to Dave Sharma in the Senate last night, it's only $6.8 billion of funding from the budget for defence over the forward estimates, and the much touted $53 billion of investment over the decade is, in the words of the finance officials, incredibly uncertain. Decisions have not yet been made, and maybe as little as $35 billion, not $53 billion. So if Richard Marles is serious about the strategic environment that we face, the dangers that we face as a country, he should match his rhetoric with reality and actually fund the ADF how they need to be funded.
Yeah, ASPI, again on the program earlier, saying, the big problem is going to be when we face our biggest strategic threat, which is going to be in the 2030s, and that's where some questionable financing has been done, if that financing is even there. And further to your point, James, we've got a clip here from last night involving the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, coughing up some of these figures and Senate estimates. Let's just run this and I'll get your reaction out the back.
Does that figure, those figures, 14 billion over 4 years and 53 billion over 10 years, does that include estimates of private capital, or is that public money only?
Senator, the alternative financing could include both.
Okay.
That hasn't been ruled out, but I mean, I would think, alternative financing in the defence portfolio through government equity, for example, is not unusual.
Okay, so when you say alternative, or when it says alternative financing, that's different to regular defence funding, like on the budget. Yeah. It's like a government equity program.
So like ANI?
Like ANI or something.
Yeah.
Okay. And there could also be private capital, private equity, for instance.
There could be.
Okay.
None of those decisions have been finalised.
That's the Finance Minister and the Department there. Just a closing thought on that, James.
Well, it doesn't fill me with confidence when the Finance Minister says none of those decisions have been made. Richard Marles has been claiming that this government is going to invest $53 billion in defence over the next decade. It turns out the government hasn't actually decided to do that. It is all spin, it is no substance, and it's no delivery, and it doesn't make our men and women in uniform or our country any safer.
OK, that's the Shadow Defence Minister, James Paterson. Thanks, James.
It was meant to be another routine day in Canberra, another round of interviews, another political debate that would probably disappear into the daily news cycle. But just hours after fresh Senate estimates evidence emerged, the conversation took a dramatic turn, and suddenly one question was being asked across Parliament, across social media, and across the defence community. Has the government been overselling its defence funding? The debate exploded after fresh scrutiny over the government's much publicised defence spending promises, with Shadow Defence Minister James Paterson arguing that newly aired evidence from Senate estimates had exposed a major gap between the government's public messaging and the figures discussed by finance officials. It wasn't just another political attack. This time, Paterson pointed directly to evidence presented during Senate estimates and argued that Australians deserved a clearer explanation. For months, Defence Minister Richard Marles has spoken about Australia's increasingly dangerous strategic environment. From growing tensions in the Indo-Pacific to Australia's long-term commitments under AUKUS, the government has repeatedly said the nation must strengthen its defence capability for the years ahead. Australians have heard about billions of dollars in additional investment, ambitious long-term planning, and preparing the Australian Defence Force for challenges well into the 2030s. But this week, the spotlight shifted from the government's announcements to the numbers behind them. Speaking during a television interview, Paterson said the government's defence funding narrative was beginning to unravel. According to him, independent analysts had already raised concerns, and now Senate estimates had added even more questions. His argument centred on one simple point. The government has repeatedly highlighted a headline figure of $53 billion in additional defence investment over the coming decade. It has also spoken about billions of dollars in increased funding across the forward estimates, but Paterson argued that the evidence presented by finance officials painted a much more complicated picture than the public messaging suggested. He pointed to analysis released by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, along with commentary from other defence analysts, arguing that the actual increase in budget funding over the forward estimates appeared significantly lower than the headline figures being promoted publicly. That immediately caught attention because defence spending is not just another line in the budget. It affects Australia's military readiness, future capability, national security planning, and confidence among allies throughout the region. As the interview continued, Paterson argued that the government's messaging and the evidence emerging through Senate estimates were becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile. The discussion quickly turned to exchanges involving Finance Minister Katie Gallagher and finance officials during Senate estimates. Senators questioned exactly how the government's much publicised long-term defence funding would be financed. The answers suggested that some future funding arrangements had not yet been finalised and could potentially involve alternative financing mechanisms rather than traditional budget appropriations. That distinction immediately became the centre of political debate. Paterson argued that Australians had been led to believe the government had already committed the full amount through the federal budget. Instead, he claimed, finance officials indicated that future decisions remained outstanding and that some funding pathways had not yet been determined. For the coalition, that was enough to launch a fresh attack. For the government, however, the picture is more nuanced. Ministers have consistently argued that Australia's defence strategy requires long-term planning across multiple budgets and governments. They have maintained that Australia's strategic environment demands significant investment over many years and that funding decisions naturally evolve as projects develop. But politics rarely rewards nuance. Instead, the headlines focused on one thing. Had Australians been given the full picture? That question spread rapidly online. Within hours, political clips from the interview were circulating across social media. Supporters of the coalition argued the government had been caught exaggerating future defence funding. Government supporters pushed back, saying long-term capability planning always involves evolving financial decisions and that critics were selectively interpreting complex budget processes. Meanwhile, ordinary Australians watching from home were left trying to separate political theatre from financial reality. For veterans, serving personnel and defence families, the debate carries particular weight. These aren't abstract numbers. They represent future ships, future submarines, future aircraft, future recruitment, future housing for defence families, future training, and ultimately, Australia's ability to respond if regional tensions continue to rise. That's why every dollar matters. This week has already seen renewed discussion about strategic competition throughout the Indo-Pacific, continued uncertainty surrounding global security, and ongoing questions about Australia's preparedness over the coming decade. Those concerns formed the backdrop to the political clash. Paterson argued that if Australia genuinely faces the strategic challenges ministers regularly describe, then funding commitments need to match that rhetoric with complete transparency. He said Australians deserve confidence that promised defence investments are fully backed by concrete financial decisions rather than assumptions about future arrangements. The government, on the other hand, continues to argue that its defence strategy remains responsible, sustainable, and focused on delivering capability over the long term. Neither side appears ready to back down. Inside Parliament, the disagreement has quickly become another front in the broader political battle over economic credibility. Opposition MPs argue Labour is relying on impressive headline figures while leaving too many practical questions unanswered. Government ministers counter that the coalition is attempting to undermine confidence in Australia's long-term defence planning for political gain. As often happens in Canberra, both sides insist the facts are on their side. Outside Parliament, defence analysts continue to examine the numbers closely. Some have questioned the pace of spending across the forward estimates, particularly as Australia's largest capability investments are expected to arrive during the 2030s. Others argue that defence procurement has always involved lengthy timelines, changing project costs, and evolving budget decisions that cannot always be fully locked in years ahead. That complexity doesn't always translate into political debate. Instead, Voters hear one figure from one side and another figure from the other. The result is confusion, and confusion is rarely good for governments. The debate also comes as Australians continue grappling with broader economic pressures. Families are watching household budgets. Businesses are managing rising costs. Regional communities continue pushing for better infrastructure. Veterans organisations continue advocating for improved services. Against that backdrop, announcements involving tens of billions of dollars naturally attract intense scrutiny. Many Australians simply want straightforward answers. If the money has been committed, show where. If future decisions still need to be made, explain that clearly. If alternative financing will play a role, explain exactly what that means. Those questions became even louder after Senate estimates. Throughout the interview, Paterson repeatedly returned to one central argument. He claimed Australians were hearing confident public statements, while finance officials were describing decisions that had not yet been finalised. Whether voters accept that criticism will likely depend on how the government responds over coming weeks. Labor ministers are expected to continue defending their record, pointing to increased defence investment compared with previous years and emphasising Australia's broader strategic objectives. The coalition is equally likely to continue pressing for greater transparency, arguing that Parliament and taxpayers deserve precise explanations about where future funding will come from. As this political contest unfolds, Australia's international partners will also continue watching closely. The United States, the United Kingdom and other regional allies have repeatedly stressed the importance of Australia's long-term defence capability, particularly as cooperation under AUKUS expands. International observers are less interested in Canberra's daily political arguments than they are in whether Australia ultimately delivers the capabilities it has promised. That's the bigger picture. Political arguments come and go. Budgets change. Governments change. But strategic commitments often extend across decades. That's why debates like this matter. Not simply because politicians are arguing over numbers, but because those numbers ultimately translate into real-world capability. Ships either get built, submarines either arrive, personnel are either recruited, equipment is either delivered, or it isn't. As Parliament prepares for more scrutiny in the weeks ahead, expect defence funding to remain firmly in the spotlight. Expect further questions during Senate estimates. Expect opposition MPs to keep challenging the government's figures. Expect ministers to continue defending their record. And expect every new budget announcement to face even closer examination than before. Because once doubts emerge about headline numbers, every future announcement faces tougher questions. That's the reality of politics. Confidence takes years to build. It can be questioned in a single hearing. Whether this week's Senate estimates genuinely represent a major political setback for Richard Marles, or simply another fierce disagreement over how long-term defence spending should be interpreted, remains a matter of political debate. What is beyond dispute is that the exchange has intensified scrutiny over one of the government's most important policy areas at a time when Australia's strategic environment remains increasingly uncertain. The questions aren't going away. The political pressure isn't easing. And with every fresh appearance before Parliament, Australians will be listening carefully for clearer answers. So what do you think? Has the opposition uncovered genuine inconsistencies in the government's defence funding story, or is this another example of political parties interpreting the same figures differently? Should ministers provide more detailed explanations about future defence funding, or is long-term flexibility simply part of managing projects that stretch across decades? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others following Australian politics. We'll continue bringing you the latest developments from Canberra as they happen.